Hi, my name is Connor Mead and I'm here today at the 2016 Canadian Science Policy Conference. And joining me today is Dr. Martin Taylor, Professor Emeritus of Geography at the University of Victoria and Executive Director of the Canadian Research Data Centre Network. So Dr. Taylor, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. Glad to have the opportunity, Connor.
Fantastic. So to start us off, why don't you tell us a little bit about the Canadian Research Data Centre Network? Why is it unique and why is it important?
So the Canadian Research Data Centre Network was established in 2000, so it's had a reasonably long history, and its reason for being is a partnership between now a consortium of 30 universities across the country and Statistics Canada, and there are 30 research data centres in each of those universities that handle the microdata, which means essentially individual level information coming from censuses, longitudinal surveys and administrative data, and they provide us arguably with one of the richest data sources we have in this country to look at social change, health issues, a broad range of issues that are of vital importance in the Canadian policy context.
So what are some of the primary challenges posed by big data for Canadian science and innovation policy, and how can we overcome them?
So you've used the right phrase, which is big data. As we increasingly bring administrative data and linked data files into the RDCs, then understandably we have to increase the computing power, processing power and storage capacity of our facilities. So we are just in the process of securing funding to do that, to take it to a completely high performance computing capacity. But there's another challenge, I think, Connor, which is as important as the technical side, and that is to build on the strengths that our 1,600 researchers across the country bring to critical questions of research and policy, and go from a model which has largely been investigator-driven research, which is obviously absolutely important, but couple that with what are now deliberate, collaborative, policy-relevant research programs. So we are instituting now under our new strategic plan 4 of those programs in the areas of income and employment, immigration and settlement, education and social development, and population health and healthcare utilisation. And these are 4 areas that these microdata allow us to look at in ways that otherwise just wouldn't be possible. And you can understand, if you just think about those broad headings that I've just mentioned, how there are big policy questions associated with each of them. But let me just talk about collaborative for a minute, because it's so, I think, important in the context of this conference. Long gone are the days when research to policy could be researchers doing their own thing, lobbing their results over a wall and hoping somebody in the policy community would catch them and make good use of them. Clearly now it has to be upstream. In other words, collaborative teams involving both the policy domain and the research domain coming together at the earliest stage to say, well, what are the questions that are of vital importance for us to address, both from a research point of view and from a policy point of view, to look at the sweet spots of connection between the two, and then to motivate, obviously, the research community working with the policy community to actually use these data to their best advantage to address those questions. I mean, let's look at some of the big questions we're facing currently. I mean, the area of immigration and settlement. Clearly, obviously, having accelerated the immigration program to a significant degree, or particular segments of it, we obviously face some critical questions about how that is going to unfold and what social change is going to occur as a consequence of that, what social support mechanisms are needed. Think about healthy aging. Right? So we've got access then to data, both health data and socioeconomic data, that look at what are the outcomes for an aging population, and enabling us then to look at some of those major questions about preparing for healthy aging and providing support services in that context. Or think also then about the income and employment area. As we obviously adjust various policy mechanisms that affect pensions, that affect income support programs and so on, what consequences do those policy changes have in terms of the economic, social and other well-being of our population? Again, these are traceable and measurable impacts through the data that are available through the Research Data Centre network. And rather than allowing for those critical policy questions to be addressed and results to be brought forward incidentally or accidentally, I think it's critically important at this juncture to do it far more deliberately and proactively. Hence developing then through the network these collaborative programs of policy relevant research in these major areas of consequence for Canada and indeed beyond Canada. Can I link that, if I could, in a way to I think a larger theme for this conference? And that is, I'm not sure we showcase sufficiently the success stories. Canada has invested hugely in research related to policy over the last, let's say, 20 years. And that networks of centres of excellence, our CFI programs, to some degree what's been happening through the Granting Council, particularly innovative programs through CHR, the Canadian Institute for Health Research. Genome Canada would be another example. The big investments that have just been happening through the Canada First Research Excellence Fund. I mean, you put all these together and we're talking about billions of dollars of investment. And many of those have research policy linkages built in to the requirements of those funding programs, either directly or indirectly. And if we just take the NCE program in one particular example, I had the opportunity just a few months ago to head a panel for the Canada Foundation for Innovation evaluating the Amundsen program, which is the Arctic icebreaker program in obviously the Arctic Ocean and northern waters, linked to one of the networks of centres of excellence, which is ArcticNet. You know, here's an internationally acclaimed success story, not only in terms of the fundamental research, in terms of understanding what's happening physically and socioeconomically in a rapidly changing environment in the north, but understanding through integrated regional reports and other mechanisms what's happening in terms of policy change in relation then to that change in environment. And that goes in both directions. So what policy changes are impacting on the well-being of the populations, but also how are those environmental and population changes informing policy. So I mean, again, all to say that that's just one example of many I could name. The organisation I was with previously, Ocean Networks Canada, based in Victoria, again, they're looking at seismic risk, especially related to submarine seismic activity and the possibility of risk of earthquake and tsunami and so forth on the west coast, working in harness now with Transport Canada, with obviously the BC government in terms of early warning tsunami detection, risk mitigation on the west coast. These are classic examples, and here we are, in the forefront. So I'd like to think that in a policy conference like this, we not only think about, well, what could we do better? That's the kind of glass half empty. But I think we also need to think about the glass half full, which is what are we already doing that is internationally recognized as being in the forefront of some of the best that's happening globally in terms of policy relevant research. And I hope that same story can and will be told of the Canadian Research Data Centre network, given some of the things that we are obviously moving forward with there.
Fantastic.
Thank you for this opportunity.
Yeah, well, so a quick follow-up question. What do you think are some of the strategies we can use to help good researchers and good research facilitating organizations like the Research Data Center Network? What sort of strategies can we use to help communicate the good work they're doing and the value of it in order to secure and increase funding and stakeholder support?
Well, some of the things that we've already talked about in the conference today come immediately to mind. I mean, one is obviously our relations with media, and so using media to the best advantage, whether that's traditional media, print media, electronic media, or now social media, to get those stories out and give them some visibility, op-eds and other things that we would use, and it's simply then being proactive in that regard. Clearly bringing to the attention of government, as we do, is another critical piece of that, so that we're gaining the financial support as well as obviously informing policy is another critical piece. But perhaps most fundamental in terms of the long run is the next generation. I mean, those of us like myself who've had careers in the academy realize that training our undergraduates and our graduate students to understand and to enjoy work at the interface between research and policy is one of the richest things you can do. And so rather than this being seen as a bonus or on the margin of core activity in our undergraduate and graduate programs, I would like to think, as we increasingly think about problem-based learning, as we do in all sorts of disciplines, then we bring that lens to policy research, because there's a natural linkage between our students being engaged in problem-based learning, be it at the undergraduate and graduate levels, and then the policy research questions that are of central importance to us. And one last thing on that, I don't think we've been creative enough in making use of exchanges between the policy agencies and the research community, or more broadly the academic community. Other jurisdictions, I think, are better at that. I mean, my colleagues in the United States who move back and forth between policy agencies and their academic appointments. And that's a very deliberate movement back and forth that I think has stood in good stead. For example, in one example, my successor at Ocean Networks Canada, Kate Moran, came in as President and CEO, and having previously been in the Office of Science and Technology Policy in the White House. She'd handled, amongst others, obviously, the Deepwater Horizon accident. You know, one of the worst calamities in recent years, contaminating the oceans. You bring people in with that kind of experience. They've taken their scientific knowledge into the policy environment, so can inform how best to mitigate the risks associated and the damage associated with an accident like that. But think about what's coming back into the academy when you've got someone who's had that kind of experience, then leading a research organization, and through that informing the next generation about how vital science to evidence to policy can be.
Do you think that that's maybe even a more promising approach to driving policy research collaboration, is rather than set up formal mechanisms for that to happen, just to encourage the back and forth between government and academia?
Well, it has to be formalized to some degree. I mean, I think just leaving it to happenstance all too often it won't happen, as opposed to it will happen. And that's where I think, again, you know, we've got a good model, and it's been referred to several times already, and we've got some of the people sitting in our rooms here, which is the MyTax program. You know, started off in a very narrow track. You know, it was basically seeking to place students into industry, right, with a very much a commercialization project in view. That's broadened now, so that we can indeed see MyTax students in a much broader arena and across a variety of sectors. So the ability, as you know, people in the rooms today are able to demonstrate, putting MyTax support into graduate students especially, who are then at the interface between research and policy, working with policy-related agencies. So I don't think it can just be organic. I think it has to be designed to some degree, and I think there has to be, you know, funding and other policy instruments put in place that accelerate and enable that to happen.
Fantastic. All right, well, Dr. Taylor, thank you so much for joining us. It's been a pleasure to have you.
My pleasure.
And where can our viewers at home go to learn more about your work?
So, crdcn.ca.
Fantastic.
Thank you very much.
Great. Thanks very much.